Matthew 5, 17 through 20 is what we'll read. I'm not sure that we'll get out of verse 17 today. We don't want to get in a hurry. We want to make sure we milk every verse as much as we can. But we'll begin in 5:17 through 20. I know everybody's familiar with it, but I always like to read our text. This is the words of our Master. Don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For I assure you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches people to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commandments will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Excellent, excellent text. I was telling Brother Sandy this is my second favorite text in the whole Bible. My first is Ezekiel 36, 26 through 27 about the new heart and the new spirit. But if I had to pick, I've told somebody before, this was my second favorite text. Super important text. I see this as the New Testament Shema. When I was teaching on the Shema, and Yeshua says it's the most important commandment, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. When you get to studying it, you realize just how important it is and how much it covers. I think if we had to pick a text that was equivalent to it in what we call the New Testament from Matthew to Revelation, I would pick Matthew 5, 17 through 20. I honestly believe it's like the glasses, the lens through which everything else in the New Testament should be read in light of. So that people always want to jump to a verse in one of Paul's epistles or Peter's epistles, and those are all great, fine, dandy. We believe those are two true apostles. But if they're not read through the lens of Matthew 5, 17 through 20, which was Peter and Paul's master, right? They were apostles of Yeshua. What does apostle mean? One who is sent out. So an apostle at one time was a disciple to a teacher. Every teacher, Luke 6:40, I think, when he's fully trained, every disciple, when he's fully trained will be like his teacher. So when Yeshua sends out an apostle, they're an emissary, or the Hebrew word is shaliach, like a messenger, an agent. They are not given authority to speak anything different than what their teacher has already spoken or told them. So you got to go through Matthew 5, 17 through 20 before you go to Romans, Galatians, 1 Peter, Jude, Revelation, all of that. I'm not saying it's not all important, but I do think some texts are more important than other texts. I do. I tell people the text in Genesis 24 where it says Rebekah got off of her camel and Isaac saw her across the field, that's an important text, right? But it's not as important as Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, Hear, O Israel. So all texts are important, but some way more than others.
Maybe if the Christian church is going to tell people to start in the New Testament instead of starting in John 1:1, they should say start in Matthew 5:17.
Amen. You know, a lot of the early Christian writings, what people call the church fathers, if you read them, most people don't read them. They just kind of quote mine. They kind of look for certain quotes to fit what they're teaching. But if you read them, you'll see that the Sermon on the Mount that was huge to a lot of the early Gentile Christians. And even the ones that didn't observe the commandments that we observe, like Sabbath, diet, feast days, they still believed in obeying everything that came out of the mouth of the Messiah. And their main focus was the Sermon on the Mount. They didn't view the Sermon on the Mount as something that was unreachable. They viewed it as something that they were supposed to listen to and obey. And if they started in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount will be the main first teaching that they got from Yeshua. So excellent, excellent sermon. So let's go through this a little bit. In Matthew 5, verse 17, let's start off with don't assume. Now that's my HCSB. Do not think, KJV. I pulled up the Bible in basic English today, and it translates it as let there be no thought. Let there be no thought. Now, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I read Greek scholars all the time. And in one of my commentaries on the Gospel of Matthew, they say that phrase, don't think or don't assume, is in the aorist tense, and it can mean don't even begin to think. So this is the beginning of Yeshua's ministry. It's not the end of Yeshua's ministry, but it's the beginning. He's a Jewish rabbi. He comes on the scene. There might have been, at this point in his ministry, maybe a little bit of gossip going around that he might have been veering away from the Torah. I don't know. But it makes sense that at the beginning of his ministry as a Jewish rabbi, he would tell them, don't even begin to think that my purpose, and that's how I take I have come. I have come. Don't think that I've come. I think it's a purpose statement. This is my ministry. I've not come to do this, but I have come to do this. So we're not even to begin to think this. So why then do we think it? I remember sometimes when I was in my 20s and I was starting to learn the Torah, I'd be riding down the road and I'd have a discussion with somebody the week before or the day before. And I remember I was always wondering, well, I wonder which parts have been done away with and which parts haven't been done away with. Well, maybe that law has been done away with. Maybe we don't have to do that animal sacrifice, or I don't know about the Levite priesthood. And I would start thinking in my mind, because of a conversation I had or maybe something I read in one of Paul's epistles, that maybe this was done away with or that was done away with. As I grew in maturity in the Spirit, I was able to better obey or fully obey the words of our Lord here. Do not begin to think. So it doesn't matter what commandment it is. If you start to think in your mind, well, maybe that one's really not for us today, or maybe that one's been done away with, you're violating what our head teacher, the head of the assembly, has told us, do not think. So it takes time, though, because there's a lot to iron out in the Newer Testament. We have to build a strong mindset and paradigm here. If you get this verse in your pocket, it's going to help you out tremendously in the rest of your studies. So he tells us the first thing, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. Destroy, synonyms for destroy, dissolve, demolish, nullify, abrogate. Don't think I've come to dissolve the law of the prophets, demolish the law of the prophets, nullify or abrogate the law of the prophets.
Mine says abolish.
Abolish. Some words will say abolish. That's good. It's a good synonym. The Greek word is kataluo. The word kataluo is used throughout the New Testament several times. A couple of uses I found today as I was going back over this. One is in Matthew 24, verse 2, where he talks about, remember he tells his disciples to look at the buildings of the temple. He says, and there shall not be one stone left upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's the word kataluo, that will be destroyed, talking about the future destruction of the temple. Sandy, you'll like this one. This is one of those ones that we wouldn't know just by reading the English, but when you get to the Greek there, in Luke 9, verse 12, and there's another place in the New Testament where it talks about a man that finds lodging or goes to lodge. That's the word kataluo. And what it's referring to is he comes to a halt for his day. He finds a place to sleep for the night. So his day stops. So it's a manner in which destroyed is used. But it's lodging. And I was like, the translators translate it to lodge or lodging. But it has to do with, my day's finished, I'm going to go to sleep. So I thought that was pretty neat right there for kataluo. A couple of other things that I found, and I brought this Bible with me. This is my New Revised Standard Version Bible with Apocrypha. So you want to have a Bible where they have the Deuterocanon or the Apocrypha in it, the intertestamental writings as they're sometimes called. I won't turn to these, but you can look at this Bible afterwards if you'd like to. But I found 2 cases in 4th Maccabees, and I want to give some credit to a friend of mine, a brother David Wilbur. He works for 119 Ministries. I know a lot of us have heard about 119 Ministries. And Brother David had recently written a small study booklet that's an exegesis of Matthew 5:17 through 20. It's an excellent book. He calls it a pronomian pocket guide to Matthew 5:17 through 20. And he brought out some things in his book that I knew, but this is one that I wasn't aware of, but it's superb. There are 2 cases in the book of 4th Maccabees where the word, or a variant of that word, kataluo, is used. One is 4th Maccabees 17 verse 9, where it speaks of Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember the guy that came in, ransacked Jerusalem, and eventually Hanukkah came out of that. Well, in 4th Maccabees 17:9, Antiochus is called, quote, the tyrant who wished to destroy the way of life of the Hebrews. And the word destroy there is kataluo. And we know that Antiochus tried to get the customs of the Hebrew people to cease in the land.
Right.
In so much that he began to kill or put to death women or men, parents who would circumcise their young sons, or if they found somebody keeping the Sabbath, or even if they found somebody pronouncing the sacred name, they would destroy them. Well, Antiochus sought to destroy the Hebrew customs, kataluo. So we see Yeshua, our Messiah, he says, I didn't come to destroy. But we see Antiochus, he did destroy. There's another case in 4th Maccabees 5 about Eleazar, the priest, who wouldn't eat pork. You guys remember that? I think that's also in 2nd Maccabees. But in 4th Maccabees 5:33, it says, quote, this is Eleazar's words, I do not so pity my old age, I think he was in his 80s, as to break the ancestral law by my own act. End of quote. The word break is kataluo, to destroy. So he's using it in a sense as though I'm not going to destroy the law by you ordering me to eat the pork so I can dissuade my fellow countrymen. And those of us that know that story know that they even took old Eleazar aside and quietly told him, we'll give you kosher meat, but your countrymen will still think you're eating pork. He even wouldn't do that because he didn't want to dissuade the young generation. Because if they saw old Eleazar do it, they might be emboldened to say, well, if he did it, the priest, then we can do it. But he didn't want to break. But I thought that was so cool that that same Greek word is used in 4th Maccabees in reference to what destroy the law means. And Yeshua said, I didn't come to do that. So
there was that one from Jonah,
yes.
Hafak.
Yes.
He said that in 40 days Nineveh will be Hafak. In other words, that would be an equivalent. I'm going to put my hand under it and totally destroy it. I'm going to lift it up from the foundation. So the Torah is God's foundation. And so you won't destroy his foundation and everything.
Amen. Do not even begin to think that I came to destroy, abolish, demolish, nullify. Then he says the law or the prophets. And I take law or the prophets as Yahweh's instruction and their legal authority. I don't think Yeshua is necessarily saying, I didn't come to destroy the Tanakh like as a book. I think that's part of it. Okay. But I think what he's saying is, I didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets, meaning the legal authority behind Yahweh's instructions. So we get Yahweh's instructions not just from the Pentateuch. I was showing this to one of my son-in-laws the other day. And I found another use of this from Brother TJ's last sermon. There are some times where in the Newer Testament you'll see a use of the law, but when they quote it, they don't quote from Genesis through Deuteronomy. And the one I found in Brother TJ's sermon on the persecution was in John 15, where he says, it's written in the law, they hated me without a cause. But that's from the Psalms.
That's right.
But yet he says it's written in the law. The Greek word is nomos, the Hebrew equivalent will be the Torah. Yeshua does this in his discussion with the Jewish leaders in John 10, where he says, "Is it not written in your law, I said ye are gods?" That's from Psalm 82. Paul does this in 1 Corinthians 14, where he says it's written in the law, with men of other tongues and other lips I will speak. That's from the prophet Isaiah, where he's quoting. But they call it the law. So in one sense, all of Yahweh's instructions is the Torah, and it can be in a prophecy book. It could be in one of the writings book, like in the Psalms. And I think this is what Yeshua is saying. I didn't come to destroy the legal authority of the instructions of Yahweh, the law, and the prophets. Let me show you. I don't only believe that from the context here, but let's go to Matthew 7, verse 12. TJ, get me Matthew 7, verse 12. And Sister Caitlin, get me Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. While they're turning there, I want you to notice from the immediate context, and if you make notes in your Bible, you can make a note here. Notice the phrase law or the prophets in verse 17. In verse 18, though, where he says, "For I assure you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished." That phrase, the law, is equivalent with law or the prophets in verse 17. But it's just called the law in 18. Now look down to verse 19. "Therefore whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments." So commandments, law, and law or the prophets are all synonymous right there. So Brother TJ, I think, had Matthew 7, verse 12. Read that one for me, brother.
"Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and the prophets."
Notice, this is the law and the prophets. What is? Something we do.
That's
An action we perform. This is basically what we call the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Whatever you would men, however you want men to treat you, you treat them. For this is the law of the prophets, the instructions of Yahweh. Sister Caitlin, Matthew 22, read 34 through 40.
When the Pharisees heard that Yeshua had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets."
Catch that? So he's talking about commandments. He narrows it down to two, which is very common Hebrew understanding, to narrow the 613 down to just a small set. And then he says everything hangs on these two. The whole law and the prophets hang on these two. So law and the prophets again is used in relation to something we do, something that's instructed, something we perform, something we do. So the subject here, catch this is very important. The subject here in Matthew 5 is not Yeshua's personal life, but his teachings. A lot of Christian expositors read this as though Yeshua is saying, "I've come to fulfill this in the life that I live." Now, he did. He did obey Yahweh fully. But the context in Matthew 5 isn't so much about his life, but his teachings, how he teaches us to live, what he teaches us to do. I did not come to destroy Yahweh's instructions for your life. I come to teach you the proper manner of living. And we know that because the entire context up until now has been Yeshua teaching the crowd how to live their life. Matthew 5, 1 through 12 with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. He's not speaking that to just tell himself, I need to be poor in spirit.
That's right.
He's saying, blessed are you when you're poor in spirit. And remember, he gets down into verses 10 through 12 and he says, blessed are you when men revile you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. In other words, you follow me, you teach what I taught, you teach I'm the Messiah. Blessed are you. And then in verses 13 through 16, which we went over last time, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Verse 16, let your light so shine among men, so that others may see your good works. Don't think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. So you see, he's talking about his teachings. I didn't come to destroy it with my teachings. I come to show you properly how to establish, confirm, and fulfill the Torah. Very, 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 very important right there. So, if Yeshua said, do not think this, why do so many think it and teach it? Why do so many even say that there are laws that if we obey today, even deny the Messiah? There are some people that say that there are certain laws we can obey that deny the Messiah. I've had it said before to me specifically about slaughtering the lamb for the Passover. They said, well, that's a denial of the Messiah. Well, Yeshua taught all of the Torah. Yeshua kept the Passover. We know he kept the Passover. Luke chapter 2 says that Joseph and Miriam, their custom was to go to the holy city for the feast days.
That's right.
And, we are Torah observant assembly, okay, but we do not observe the Torah like Yeshua would have observed the Torah. And not just Yeshua, as his parents were to observe the Torah. The reason I say that is because they were born in it from generation to generation to generation. They lived in the land. The temple still stood. I mean, they would be thankful to find people like us now who did what we could. But they observed it way better than we did because of our circumstance is different than their circumstance. So, part of observing the Torah was killing the lamb at Passover. How can you deny the Messiah by doing something that he did himself or that he taught us to do? It's really impossible. You can't deny the Messiah. I think what people do is this. I think people are just more familiar with other texts in the Newer Testament, and they read those texts without understanding, and then they try to back read what they find there into Matthew 5:17 through 20. And they come up with all these excuses where, well, Jesus did fulfill the law in his own life, so we don't have to fulfill it. Or maybe they'll say, well, he's just talking about the moral law. And we'll talk about that more momentarily. So I think that's why people think that he came to do away with the law.
There's an excellent thing, if you notice, in the Greek, in the Hebrew, you have different ways to say no. So El is one way, it sounds like Elohim, and that's the no. And then you have a lo. And so like in the Ten Commandments, lo will occur 12 times, but even that doesn't have to be an absolute no. But in the Greek, there's a way to say no that's negotiable, that's may. But in the Greek, there's one called oo, and oo is never negotiable. So it shows up, he knew her not. And so then it'll occur again, man does not live by bread alone. And it shows up again, you shall not tempt Yahweh your God. So if you look at the second no here, he says, this word will hold up in a court of law. I am not coming to annul. So it's an absolute no. It's a non-negotiable no, is what it is.
Excellent, Sandy. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, brother. Very, very good. And those examples as well. So he didn't come to destroy Yahweh's instructions, their legal authority. He came to fulfill. And people get off track here because they immediately, when you see the word fulfill, they think of a prophecy that is being fulfilled. And that's one use of the word fulfilled in the Bible, where you have, here in the Gospel of Matthew, we went over it months ago, maybe last year, where when when Miriam was found pregnant with Yeshua, it said, and thus it was fulfilled, which was spoken about by the prophet Isaiah. And he quotes Isaiah 7:14 and applies it to Yeshua. So there are uses in the New Testament where the word fulfilled can mean like a prophecy being fulfilled. But remember, context, context, context. You want to interpret a word in the context in which it is used. And in this case, fulfill doesn't refer to Yeshua fulfilling the law or a prophecy being fulfilled. Fulfill is used as to establish, to confirm, to explain properly, to exegete the Torah accurately. And it's used as an opposite of destroy. So I did not come to do this, destroy, but I came to do something opposite of destroy, to fulfill or to properly show the understanding of. If by fulfill you think that in fulfilling it he abolished it, the text is self-contradictory, right?
That's right.
People tell me all the time, I've had countless discussions about this text, and they'll say, well, I don't believe he destroyed the law, Matthew. I believe he fulfilled it. But what they have in their mind, if you continue to talk to them, is that once he fulfilled it, certain parts of it have been destroyed. You see, has anybody ever had the conversation? I had a conversation one time, I can remember it like it was yesterday. Me and Josiah were there, and it was a Baptist preacher. And he said the same thing. We had done some work for him. And he said, well, we don't teach that Jesus destroyed the law. He fulfilled it. And I said, and I looked at him and I said, but what do you mean by fulfilled? He said, well, it is finished. He said on the cross, it is finished. He said, so, he did it. We don't have to do it. And I said, well, that sounds to me like his mission ultimately was to destroy the law. And I think he caught a glimpse of it. I could see it kind of in his eyes when we were talking, Sandy.
The context determines this.
Mm-hmm.
It being pleroma of the 111 verses. As you go on, he says, you don't commit adultery, but you don't look to lust. You don't go ahead and hate your brother.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do any murder. Well, this word here actually means I'm going to cram it to the full. So it actually is used as a net that is crammed absolutely full with the fish. It's also used as you have a hollow place in the ground and you cram it as full as you can. In the market, if you went somewhere to purchase something like grain, the fellow would shake it and cram it, and then he would actually put his finger and push it down. So this whole context is cramming something full. So it's used when she came in and she poured on his feet. It crammed the whole house full of the perfume. So the context will determine if it's fulfilled like a prophecy. But this whole context of the 111 verses, that's why it says, you have heard, but I will now cram it full. And so I'm getting ready to cram this full and everything.
That's very good. One brother showed me something not long ago. I'm going to pull it up on my eSword here. But you know how when you look up in a lexicon, a Hebrew or Greek lexicon, it'll give you varying definitions for a word? Well, in Thayer's lexicon, there's so many different definitions for the word pleru or pleromai in Matthew 5:17. Hold on, let me see.
It'll be 4137, I believe.
And yes, 4137. And in Thayer's lexicon, Henry Joseph Thayer gives one definition, and it's the last definition he gives of the word pleru or pleromai. It's definition 2C3, and this is what he says: to fulfill, i.e., to cause God's will as made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be.
Wow.
And Thayer's lexicon says that definition goes with Matthew 5 verse 17. So instead of opening up a lexicon and just picking a definition, this particular scholar says this is what fulfill means in that case: to cause God's will as made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be. I think that's beautiful. Somebody showed me that not too long ago. So I didn't realize that was there in Thayer's. Another objection I've heard is, well, this is talking about the New Testament law, the words of Jesus. He didn't come to destroy the New Testament law. And the reason that doesn't make any sense is because we're here at the beginning of Yeshua's ministry, okay? He hasn't even died yet. He's still a practicing Jew under the older or first covenant. And when he says, I've not come to destroy the law, he has to be talking about a law that's already in existence, that he didn't come to do something to. So it doesn't make any sense, I didn't come to destroy the New Testament law. Well, even in the minds of modern Christians, the New Testament had not yet came into existence. It was not active yet. So that doesn't make any sense. TJ?
I think in the following verses, 21 through, I give up my glasses, so 25, would explain the law that he's talking about. You've got, in verse 21 you got murder and the judgment there in, I guess, verse 22, and then verse 23, we've got the ceremonial laws, and so all three of the categories of what people might call broken law, like the moral, the civil and the ceremonial, they're all recorded in the next 3 or 4 verses. So can't be just talking about, what Yeshua, a law that maybe he instituted, or just a moral code or something like that. But all three of those categories are recognized, in the next 3 or 4 verses.
Yeah.
The subject of judgment would be the civil law. The gift that you would leave at the altar would be the ceremonial law, and then do not murder is the moral code.
Yeah.
To start with. One's judgment statutes, I guess.
Yeah.
All apply.
What makes that so important is that's right here in this context.
That's right.
So, and that was TJ just said my next point. My next point was people say this. He's going to give you glasses back there, Rocky.
I told him to keep.
People say this was just the moral law. That's another objection. So you have some people that say, well, he did fulfill it, but yet we don't have to fulfill it now. That's one objection. The second one is, well, it's New Testament law. That doesn't make sense. The third one is, well, this is the moral law, like people will say, like the 10 Commandments. Well, number one, most people don't observe the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the 4th of the 10 Commandments. And most people don't really know or revere Yahweh's name, and that's the 3rd of the 10 Commandments.
Right.
So, are we going to say the Sabbath is not a moral commandment? That's the first thing you might want to bring up to them. But then the second one is all moral, civil, and ceremonial are here. And those categories, all of Yahweh's law is moral. Okay,
Right.
But it's okay to understand a category of like moral in the sense of, all right, this has to do with everyday living. Civil in the sense of we're going before the council or the court of law. Ceremonial in the sense of this does not necessarily have to do with everyday living to my neighbor, but this is a ritual or an uncleanness or cleanliness law or something like that. And TJ's correct. Let's read that in Matthew 5. Look at verses 21 through 24. You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder. All right, so that would be classified under the moral category, right? And whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. So he's going deeper. He's saying murder will start with being angry. So we don't want to even be angry with our brother. Some manuscripts say without a cause, right there. And whoever says to his brother, fool, will be subject to the Sanhedrin. Your Bible might say the council. But Sanhedrin is like a transliteration from the Greek. And it refers to the council of elders in Israel that you would go before, like at a court case, and they would pronounce a judgment onto you based upon the Torah. So that would be civil law. And then, if you go down to verse 23, so if you are offering your gift on the altar,
That's right.
and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar and first go and be reconciled with your brother and then come offer your gift. Gift in Hebrew is korban. And it can be an animal, or it can be sometimes money or items, like when the wise men brought the gifts. I think it's the same word in the Greek. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they brought it to Yeshua. But the key here in this text, where we know it's an animal sacrifice, is the word altar.
That's right.
You have your gift, your sacrifice there. You're bringing it to offer it on the altar. So this will be under the ceremonial category. So in context, when Yeshua says, I didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets, he's not just talking about what the church world calls moral law. He's talking about all 3 categories, moral, civil, and ceremonial. That's in the context. Very, very important, Brother Sandy.
And when you look at the context, when they're talking about the New Testament or whatever, every single person he talked to, there was not a single Christian present at that time. They were all Jewish people.
Sure.
And that's why I said, you are the light of the world, because that's what Israel was to be. And like one of the rabbis told me one time, See, when the reformers come along, they're the one that divided in 3 categories. And he said, you don't do that. We never divide it that way.
Sure.
Because the whole thing was the Torah.
Yeah.
So he said, once you let them divide it, then they're giving you their definition, and you have to go by their definition.
Yeah.
But he said it all falls onto what we call Torah.
Yeah.
So he said, you don't let them divide it into those 3 categories.
A lot of people do the ceremonial thing to not have to be obedient to that particular law. So I had one pastor one time when I was talking to him about the beard, he said, well, that's ceremonial law. Or the tassels, that's ceremonial. But that's what makes them feel justified by not having to obey it. They just slap a ceremonial category on it, and then they don't have to obey it. But remember, and I talked about this a little bit last week in the sermon, every commandment, or let me say it like this, not all commandments directly relate to love that we show to our fellow man. Some commandments have nothing to do with how we treat other people, but simply between us and the Creator.
That's right.
So the tassels, it's not the weightiest of commandments, but it's a commandment between us and Almighty Yahweh. Whereas we look upon it ourselves and we remember, all right, we need to be faithful to the covenant between me and the Almighty. And it might be said the same thing for the beard or other commandments as well in regards to the gifts at the altar. All right, let's see where we're at here. Yes, very important here. I brought this book with me. This book was written in 2007 or published in 2007 by a man named David Biven. It's called New Light on the Difficult Words of Jesus, Insights from His Jewish Context, David Biven. I think I bought this back in maybe 08 or 09. But on pages 93 to 102, he talks about what I think is the best understanding of destroy and fulfill. And chapter 14 is called Jesus' Technical Terms About the Law. Let me read this first paragraph right here. It says, quote, Jesus was very much part of the rabbinic dialogue of his day. The sages focused their discussions on the interpretation of the Torah in order to understand how God's Word applied to their lives. Frequently, Jesus employed the technical terminology that was traditionally used in these discussions. Terminology that may not always be clear to us. Knowing more about rabbinic technical terms will clarify Jesus' words. End of quote. Sometimes, and Brother TJ and I have both mentioned this in our sermons, sometimes something that is difficult for us to understand now was very simplistic for Hebrews to understand during the Second Temple period, because they all just realized this is common knowledge, this is common verbiage. But here we are 2,000 years removed, and we may misunderstand or misinterpret something because of our culture upbringing outside of the Hebrew faith. Cindy?
The fellow that gave the foreword to that,
Yes.
Pryor, was one of our teachers.
Really?
Yes, you would like this.
Okay.
He looks exactly like TJ.
Really?
Yes.
Mr. Dwight A. Pryor?
Yes, sir.
Are you serious?
Yes, sir. He looks exactly like TJ.
How about that?
Yes.
I'm going to have to pull it up now and see if I can find him.
Yeah.
What is the boy?
Well, I'm not going to read this whole chapter. Once again, anybody can look at the book after we're done. But let me give you the gist of what Mr. Biven says. What he does is he back translates, and Brother Sandy does this a lot, where you'll have like a Greek word for destroy and fulfill. You can back translate that into Hebrew and find the Hebrew equivalent words. Well, Mr. Biven has done that, and for destroy, he found a Hebrew equivalent word levatel, and for fulfill, it's lekayim. All right? What he does is he says that during the Second Temple period, when you had these rabbis and teachers that would get together to discuss the Torah, how to obey it properly, they would all be listening to each other's interpretations and understandings, about any particular law. And just like we discuss the Torah sometimes around the campfire at Sukkot, and somebody will say something and say, well, this is my view on that verse. and let's say TJ gives me a view on that verse, and I'm sitting there listening, and the more he talks, the more it makes sense. And when he gets done, the rabbis that were listening, if they thought he did a good job, they would say, he has fulfilled the Torah. But if they thought one rabbi stood up and didn't explain it properly, and it may cause somebody to be disobedient to a law, they would say, not a good interpretation, that destroys the Torah. This makes the most sense to me in light of the context in Matthew 5, because if you continue to read, he says in verse 20, unless your righteousness, which means what you do, surpasses or goes beyond the scribes and the Pharisees, you'll in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on in the rest of the chapter to say, you have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, but I say unto you. Notice he doesn't use the it is written formula. He says, this is what they've said, this is what I say. And I think what he's doing is he's contrasting some, not all, but some of the teachings of the scribes and Pharisees in that day that had gotten sidetracked away from the Torah. And he's saying, now I'm going to tell you the proper way to understand this law. So what Mr. Biven has mentioned here in his book fits so beautifully in context of destroy and fulfill, where Yeshua is saying, don't think that I've came to give you an incorrect understanding or a misinterpretation of the Torah. I haven't come to destroy it. I've come to tell you properly how to carry it out. And so any case where the Pharisees may have gotten off track, Yeshua says, no, let me tell you the true meaning of that verse. So, like with the instance with murder, you had some of the Pharisees that would say, well, do not murder. You've heard that it had been said, do not murder. But then Yeshua goes a little bit deeper, because maybe some Pharisees were teaching, well, it's okay to be angry with your brother in this instance or in this instance. And Yeshua is saying, no, nip that thing in the bud. Don't be angry with your brother. Don't call your brother a fool, or don't call your brother an empty head. And so he's contrasting his true interpretation that fulfilled Torah with some of their interpretations that destroyed Torah. Does that make sense? It made all the sense in the world to me when I first read this book, and I was like, man, where has Mr. Biven been for all these years? Because I knew Matthew 5:17 was clear as day, that Yeshua didn't come to destroy the Torah, but I always wondered what it exactly means in that context, and I think Mr. Biven has done a superb job explaining that. And he goes over about 9 pages more than that. And so I highly recommend that you get this book. There's a lot more good nuggets in this book as well. Brother Sandy.
And see, sometimes they would only stress one portion. So like in where he's talking about not doing no murder, it says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. So he's quoting from 19:18. So when the lawyer come and said, who then is my neighbor? He was quoting from that passage. But then when Yeshua re-quoted to him, he went to 1934, because it's a different word for your neighbor and everything.
The gear?
Yeah. And then he was saying, well, who then was neighbor to him? And then he said, well, I suppose the one that done good unto him.
The Samaritan.
So see,
Yeah,
they were picking and choosing on their thing, but then...
Trying to justify himself, he says.
Yes, but then see what happens, he crammed it full. Well, okay, here's what we're going to do. Then let's go to 1934, I believe it is.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, Leviticus 19 is what you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Very good. Let's see. Okay, so fulfill then is best understood as the opposite of destroy, and it means fully doing and teaching it properly for you to know how to be obedient. Or like Mr. Thayer said, to cause God's will to be made known so that you know how to obey it properly. I think that's what Yeshua is saying. I didn't come to destroy it, but I came to do the opposite of it, fulfill. Very similar construction there. I think it's in Matthew 10 later in the Gospel, where he's talking about how that when you live for Yahweh, sometimes it causes rifts even in your family. And he says, do not think that I came to bring peace. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. Opposites. Okay? The same word but, I think it's the Greek word Allah there in Matthew 5:17 and in Matthew 10. But is a contrast. It's the opposite. I didn't come to do this, I came to do the opposite. That's the best way to understand 5 and 17. Any questions or comments? at this point right here. Okay. The last note that I have here for today is, let's believe Yeshua. We say that we believe in Yeshua. Let's believe what he taught right here. I know different people are at different levels of understanding and stages. And I get questions all the time. I had somebody email me the other day. And they're new to the Torah. Only been walking in about a year. And I remember when I had the same question and thought. They said, they don't understand what commandments they need to obey and which ones that they don't. And my response to this person was, I remember when I had those same thoughts in my mind was, and I give this advice to everybody. When you realize that Yahweh's commandments are still for us today as a whole, what you need to do is go back and give the Bible a fresh reading. And anytime you come upon a verse that gives a command, and it's in your power to be obedient to that command, that one's for you. That one's for you. Now, if you come upon a verse and he's talking to Noah and he says, build an ark, that one's not for you. Right? That's not teed out for me. Or if he's talking to the sons of Aaron and he says, all right, sons of Aaron, I need you to do this. That one's not for you. That one wasn't even for an Israelite back then at that time from a different tribe. You see? You could have a Hebrew man from the tribe of Issachar, and when Yahweh was giving a commandment to a son of Aaron, it didn't apply to that man from Issachar. See? You may have a commandment that you come across as a man reading the Bible, and it's talking to a female Israelite to do this. Well, that one's not for me. But then the next verse, it might be one for the man, and that one is for me. So that it's as simple as that. If we do put the number of 613 onto the commandments in the Torah, which is an old understanding, if we put that number on, not all 613 apply to Rocket, not all 613 apply to Phyllis. But when you read a commandment and you say, well, I could do that commandment. Like, for instance, do not eat of their flesh nor touch their dead carcass, about the camel or the pig. You say, well, there's nothing stopping me from obeying that commandment. Guess what? That commandment's for you. So you don't have to wonder, Brother Sandy.
The word would be mishmeret.
Mm-hmm.
So the commandments that you can keep is translated in the Hebrew as a charge. So there'll be 78 occurrences, and it means you are a sentry that I have delivered something to you, and it is your duty now to protect the person or the thing until I return. Mm. So that's called, I have given you a charge. So any of the commandments that belong to you are your charge.
Very good. So Yeshua's mission had nothing to do with the destruction of the Torah. Anybody that would teach you something different than that, you need to be aware of, because you need to focus on what your Lord, your Master, has said. Do not think. Yeshua believed in Psalm 19, the law of Yahweh is perfect, converting the soul. He believed in Psalm 119, Sister Virginia. Blessed are the undefiled in the way who walk in the law of Yahweh. He loved those texts. He believed in those texts. As I preached before, there was no person to ever live before him or after him that was as obedient to the Torah as he was. He was the unblemished Lamb. As Yochanan said, behold, the Lamb of Elohim that takes away the sin of the world. He was unblemished, which has to do with his perfect life. Totally obedient. So you would think that if that's how he lived, that's how he taught us to be. Now, obviously, maybe we'll close with this, because you always want to balance things out. I'm not up here telling you that Brother Matthew is perfect in the Torah. There are certain things that I struggle with even now in my life, and certain things I pray about when I'm riding down the road at work. Yahweh help me with this, or Yahweh help me with that. But my desire and my goal is to be perfect in the Torah, even though I know that I'm not. Remember a couple sermons back when I read one of the, it was a sister in Yahweh, one of the comments that she placed on one of my sermons. And she said, I know that I'm not perfect. She said, but I will forever, for the rest of my life, strive to be perfect. And I think that's such a beautiful comment, because it's an acknowledgement that we're still in this flesh, but yet it's a desire to want to do the right thing. Paul said that evil inclination is present in me when I have something to do that's right. Evil is present. But we can overcome. We can overcome and do what's proper and correct. So let's believe Yeshua. Anytime somebody tells us something in the Torah has been abolished, say, our master says don't think that. I'm not even supposed to think it, much less teach it. They don't just think it. They teach it in the seminaries. That this is one of the main reasons Jesus came. But yet, we're going through the book of Acts at least once a month here. And so far what we've seen in Acts 1, 2, and 3, and beginning in 4, we don't see anything about the apostles not keeping the Torah. We see in Acts 3 they still would go up to the temple at the hour of prayer, which was the sacrificial hour. They still continued to do these things because it's what their master taught them to do.
That's right.
I told Kim the other day, my son-in-law, we were talking about the Sabbath, and I said, after Yeshua died, it says at the end of Luke 23 that the women, they beheld his body how it was laid. And it says, and then they went home and prepared spices and ointments, and they rested on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. They just watched their Lord die. There was nothing in their mind that thought, well, now that he's dead, we don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore. Right. He never taught them that my death is going to be the annulment of the commandments. He never taught them that. If anything, we can get to a point in our life where if we habitually commit sin willfully, then we are denying the Messiah. Hebrews 10:26, if we go on sinning willfully, So it's the exact opposite of how some Christian teachers would teach. That's all I've got for today. Any questions or comments, any words of exhortation about the text, or anything that you don't quite understand properly, we'll try to help. Everything's good. This is a popular text around here, so it's an easy text. I remember last month when I knew I had to talk about this one, this is one of my easiest texts to teach on. I could probably do it without notes, but I always like notes because I don't want to leave anything out, Brother Sandy.
Because of the flesh and everything, you see the balance. It says, make me to go in the way of thy commandments, for therein do I delight.
Yeah.
And so if we really understand it, you're thinking, it's for my good that I eat this way, or it's for my good that I get to do this.
Amen.
So if you really, really understand it, and you think, I may not want to do it, but it's really for my good. And you'll never regret doing what's right.
Amen.
Even though you may want to do it, not want to do it at that time.
That's right.
And stuff.
And I've got to where now when people generally, when I bring up something about the Torah, they'll always want to go to something in Paul's writings, or maybe they'll go to Acts 10 with the sheet let down to Peter, or Mark 7, where they think Jesus said you can eat everything now. And I've got to where I just say, well, let's go back to the foundation of the words of our Master in Matthew 5:17 through 20. Before I even, go in and explain anything that they want, I say, let's start here, because they agree with me that Yeshua is our Master, if they're a Christian person. And let's get this down before we move on. And I really think that's what we got to do. Just like the Torah. You don't understand Deuteronomy 6:4 through 9. The rest of the Torah is not as easy to understand. But when you realize, okay, this is covenant obligations, and we're to serve Yahweh with all of our heart. So may Yahweh bless His word to our hearts today. So.